Nelson Mandela believed that there is no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. Children are the most important resources. Even though India's children account for more than one third of the country's population, their rights are violated every day. The statistics are grim, yet very little is known about what it's like to be a part of such horrific numbers. Hello, I'm Gitashri, and today we have with someone who decided to go into this arena to make sure that the vulnerable children of India have a safe and a nurturing environment to grow up. She's a social entrepreneur, co-founder of Guardians of Dreams, TEDx speaker, Acumen Fellow, GP Birla Fellow at Ananta Aspen. Bringing you the story of Miss Meghati, the journey of leadership. Let's begin. Hi, Megha. It's an absolute delight to have you here with us today.
Hi, Geetashri. Excited to be here today.
You co-founded the organization Guardians of Dreams in the year 2015, right? So,
Yes,
supporting shelter homes, empowering children, and influencing policy
yes,
through research to promote better life outcomes for children living in orphanages or shelters has been its main objective. So, when was it that you realized that you wanted to go in this aspect? Because women, when it comes to women, they're expected to, get a basic degree, settle
yeah,
down, get a job, marry, have kids. So, how did you think of going into this
yeah.
social entrepreneurship?
Well, okay. So, one, I don't think it was a single moment that made me jump into social entrepreneurship. And two, yes, being a woman, it was hard. But I guess maybe if I just give you context to what my process was, maybe your listeners can see maybe there was maybe a moment.
Okay.
um, so primarily I work with children outside the care and protection of families. And if I look back, I think because of my family, I always had some contact with vulnerable children. So even when we ourselves were children, we used to go to orphanages, shelter homes, and we used to go and spend time with children or spend time with disabled people, etc. But I do remember, and some of my friends tell me this is really weird, but I remember when I was 6 years old, or maybe 6 or 8, I remember sitting in the car back at home, and I saw a child under the bridge, and my mother, like he or she was living under the bridge, and my mother said that, look at that child is there and you're at home, you get a safe bed at night. And I was like, why is that happening, as my child brain could not handle it. So she said that, there is no reason, it's just pure luck, right? It's pure luck that you got born into our family and you're not there. And I remember thinking that was just so unfair. It was so unfair that luck was the reason why that child didn't get a blanket in the night. And that, I remember, was my main thought. And I remember feeling very restless because I wanted to go and help. I wanted to go and put the child somewhere, even at that age, or I wanted to give him money. But my mom said, what you need to do is you got to grow up, and when you make money, you give some of your money to that child. And I remember thinking, I was very restless. I was like, I have to grow up to help. This is a very long term process, right? So then what I did was, I started looking for opportunities. I mean, I wouldn't say it was a conscious decision, but I started seeing opportunities as how you could help. So I remember when I was 14 years old, there was the Kargil war that was happening. So me and my friends, we decided to do a fundraiser. So we decided to do bake sales and competitions in my apartment, and we raised 14,000, which is like a lot of money for a child, and we gave it to
My
the Kargil
God.
war. Right. Yeah. So similarly, I kept organizing things, and then I would keep giving money to charity. And I think it gave me a power trip when I was young, because at least I didn't have to grow up to start helping. So similarly, like that, I reached college, and when I was in college, I'm an engineer, like many people in our country.
Okay.
But I started volunteering at children's homes to teach children how English.
Oh.
I'm
Okay.
embarrassed to say that I think that I learned more Tamil than they learned English. So I'm not too sure how effective I was as a teacher, but definitely volunteering with a children's home directly helped me sort of understand what are the challenges that children's homes are going through. That it's not
Absolutely.
just education. The infrastructure was so bad. You know, there'll be a lot of cases where there were not enough mattresses in the home. So I remember before I left college, like after I passed out, I gathered all the leftover mattresses from all the fourth years, and I just went and I booked a lorry and I went and gave that mattresses to that home. You know, they don't
Wow.
have, like, a lot of homes don't have like proper clothes to wear or food, you know. And I was just thinking, this is ridiculous. Like, how is it that so many kids can be living here and they just don't have the resources to look after a child? But I'm very grateful to that volunteering experience because it gave me like a complete know-how of what's happening on ground that I don't think that I would have gotten from just imagining how children's homes should be. And
Okay.
eventually I kept continuing, and within the volunteering system I enjoyed fundraising a lot. So as you can see, I've always been fundraising ever since I was a child. So I started working on fundraising, and I met my co-founders during that time, and we were all very attached to the passion that, you know, we can actually maybe solve the problem. And I don't know if that is too much to think about, but that is what we truly believe. We truly believe that if we're able to transform the quality of care that a children's home can provide, kids who are passing out of that home actually can have opportunities and shots just like both of us, right? They just need someone to
Great.
take care of
Yeah.
them, which is when we decided that we wanted to work with children's homes. And particularly, we wanted to work with transforming the entire children's homes versus just one input such as education. Because especially with respect to children outside the care and protection of families, if you don't have everything else looked after, just education is not going to cut it. If you don't have a safe space to sleep, if you don't have, I don't know, just like a light to study in, or if you don't have medicines when you're sick, if you don't have the proper nutrition when you're a child to be able to, you know, have great health, how do you expect that child to even be able to study or excel in school, right? So we wanted to work for a more holistic solution. Now, when it comes to choosing this to be a career, after university, I actually started a corporate job, and I don't think there's anything wrong with corporate jobs. From the bottom of my heart, I don't think it's boring, but I think it was boring for me, right? I think I'm
Yeah,
not the kind of person
definitely.
who's okay with. I'm not the kind of person who is okay with the monotony of of doing the same thing every day. That just wasn't my cup of tea. And while I was
Okay.
volunteering, I got a taste of building things on my own and trying to solve problems on my own. And that was like a lot of ownership. And I think maybe I got a taste of that juice, and I couldn't give it up. So I did try you know, because I love my family. I love them to the core, but they didn't want me to do anything risky. And I remember
Oh,
once somebody asked me, who would marry a girl who works in the NGO sector? And these were just like questions I didn't connect to.
the
And I did
typical
try it.
stereotypes.
Yeah, it's typical. Yes, that was the biggest problem at that point of time. And what I did was I did try, to be honest, Geeta. I did try to do what the family needed me to do, and I just
Okay.
I felt choked at the end of it. I just couldn't take it anymore. And I think, and this went on till the age of 24, 25. And I think I reached a point where I decided that I got to do this for me. I'm not able to continue on like this. This is not the kind of, I was not having any control over my life, you know. And in
Yeah.
fact, the MBA, I did my GMAT. I did my GMAT and I scored like 91 percentile. I did really well in my GMAT. And I remember after
Great.
I scored my mark, after I scored my mark was when I realized I actually don't want to do this. So I spent like 2, 3 months sitting and slogging hard and studying for that GMAT exam that everybody, you know, goes crazy over. And I got that mark, and that's when I realized I am doing this for all the wrong reasons. I did this to prove to my family that I can do it. That is definitely the wrong reason to be doing an exam. And I just decided I didn't want to do it. And I decided to put me first. So I do think there is no right or wrong way of going about things, especially if girls are wondering which way to go. I don't think there's right and wrong. So, because I did that same thing where I started asking everybody under the sun, like, what do you think I should do? What do you think I should do? And one day it just dawned on me, you do what's right for you, right? This if an MBA works well for Geeta, it might not work well for me, right? And for two
Exactly.
different reasons, because we're completely two different people. We're on our own
Two
journey,
different person.
right?
Exactly.
Exactly. So if we are two different people, then we shouldn't be sticking to the same plan, right? So then I took a step back and decided, like, this is going to be my plan. This is where my heart, my gut, my mind is all telling me that I really want to go to the social space. I really do want to give back, and I really enjoy doing it. And a lot of people ask me, how is it that you've managed to give up this and do this career? And I find that such a strange question, because I am so happy in my career, right? True, I'm not
Exactly.
maybe earning as much as my peers, right? But I am so satisfied and I'm so happy about where I am and what I'm able to do. And I think that's what I mean. Happiness is not like an end state. I think you just need to be happy while you live through life. And yeah, I'm really happy that I made that decision to choose me and put me first. And my family still loves me and they're still there, right? So there were no consequences at the end of the day.
Okay, that's so great. Matlab, it seems not only like you weren't just smart since you were a kid, you were as well intuitive and empathetic. So that's a
Well,
really
yeah.
unique thing to be in a child, when you're a
Oh,
child and you have, it's a very different thing that you are feeling empathetic towards someone. So I'm just,
yeah.
that is so great. Okay. So,
Thank you. That was so quite
India
kind. Thank
being,
you.
yeah, India being such a densely populated country has a huge number of children. Actually, children of India account for more than one third of the population of the country. So, given that they are all deprived of the basic child care or are even orphans, so um, given that the number is so large and the issue is so deep rooted, how do you think what is the approach to begin with or tackle the situation?
Yeah, Geeta. So, like rightly said, one thing with the social space and specifically with India, when it comes to social causes, the numbers are high because of the fact that we have a huge population, right? Whether you're working with children
Exactly.
or women or any kind of marginalized community that you're working with, the numbers are always high. So, unlike the for profit sector where you work with a certain number and you keep growing, when you go into the social entrepreneurship sector, you work backwards. Like, okay, this is the number that we have to get to and help. We need to change the sector. This is the number, so we have to think scale while designing our solution, right? Because if you speak to most social entrepreneurs, they're not okay with just helping a few of whoever they want to help, right? In our case, it's children. We don't want to help a few children. We want to help all children, right? That's the way that we go about
Yeah.
it. So, rightly said, when we started Guardians, we started thinking about scale from day one. The numbers that we're currently working with, so we go by a number that's set by SOS Village. What they say is about 2 crore children are said to be vulnerable. That means that they are
Yes.
neglected, abused, exploited, etc. So just to put 2 crore into perspective, 2 crore is the size of Mumbai city. That's the number of people in a Mumbai city. So imagine
Exactly.
a Mumbai city with only children who are just not getting loved and nurtured and who aren't safe, right? So imagine what kind of like outcomes we can expect from that many number of children in our country. It's a really sad situation, right? So when we wanted to work with our children, we had to decide like a subsection, like what is a mode or a method that we are going to use. So just to give the listeners a context, so when you the components of a childcare system, when a child is in need of care and protection, is rescued from trafficking or abuse, or who are abandoned, they are first brought to a shelter home by police or other NGOs. So at the shelter home, you can do one of four things. The first is repatriation. When a child is rescued, we check whether we can reunite them with the family, whether it is safe to send them home. We check if the parents are financially able to look after a child, and in which case, if the parents are willing and if the finances are the only reason, then we help with, I mean, people help with financial assistance. The second The second
I see.
mode that we look at is adoption. A family can decide to raise a child who is 18 or less and does not have a family of their own. All legal rights of the birth parents will be transferred to the adoptive parents, right? The third thing that could happen to the child is the child could be put into foster care. So the foster care, though, it's a relatively new guideline that's come out, and it's basically two foster parents will take care of 6 to 10 children in their home. In this case, sometimes the biological parents do have some say in decisions related to the child. And the fourth is
Okay.
that they stay in a shelter home. So children stay in shelter homes, or they can stay in a shelter home till the age of 18. After this, they are considered to leave the system, right? So out of this whole like four processes of what happens to a child, the basic unit of this is a children's home. Like even during COVID, what happens is when a child is abandoned or has lost his parents, they bring the child to a children's home, right? It is from the children's home that
Okay.
the child can either be repatriated or can be adopted or can be put into foster care, right? These options happen after a child comes to a children's home. But if none of these options happen, then the child has to stay in a children's home. So in a lot of sense, for a child who's outside the care and protection of families, the children's homes is the last safety net for a child. If a children's home does not exist, then the child is back on the streets, right? So what we
Okay.
consider is that children's homes are the bedrock of childcare, the last safety net of childcare for a child in need, right? So this is why we decided to work with children's homes. And next we had to decide like what to do about scale, right? And because 2 crore children, the logistics gets fairly complex. So when generally people want to work with the children's home, what they do is they build their own children's home, they build their own model, etc. But that's the first attempt. But when the scale of the problem is so high, right? When the scale of the problem is 2 crore children, how do you tackle that problem by yourself, right? The fact is that
Exactly.
owned and operated homes, when you own a home and you operate your own home, you will eventually hit a scale wall, right? uh, for example, some of the largest providers, childcare providers in the country, like SOS Village, Don Bosco, etc., who are doing exceptional jobs, right? They cater to less than 15,000 children through all the shelter homes that they run across the country, right? That is the limit that they have
Okay.
themselves, right? Each of them, right? So the fact of the matter is that 95% of all the other homes, right, in the country are, or 95% of children living in shelter homes across the country live in small, unorganized, and under-resourced, independently run shelter homes, right? So, for example, what could
Okay.
happen is that I have a big house, I've retired, I kind of want to take children in and help. So I'll probably start a shelter home myself. I'll register and I'll take in, let's say, 10 children, right? The next thing you know, children have been dropped at my doorstep by other people, right? And now what happens is that I can't send a child
Yeah.
away. I can't send a child away. I have to take in the child. So eventually, what happens with these independently run homes is that they start taking in more children than they can have. My house can actually only house 10 children, but the next thing you know, I have 35 children. 35 children, and I don't have the space and I don't have the facilities to these well-intentioned homes that actually do open, right? So there is a definite scale
Yeah.
wall issue
Absolutely.
when it comes to the fact of me running it on my own. I will not be able to help the 2 crore children out there, right? So so again, we went back to the drawing board thinking, okay, so then how
Exactly.
do we do this? And what we thought is maybe we could borrow from the for-profit market, right? So other for-profit sectors. So in for-profit
Okay.
sector, you see them going and doing scale, right? They're able to do scale solutions. So how do they do it, right? And one thing that we saw an example really
Yeah.
inspired us. So, and this belonged to the hospitality industry. So prior to 2010, the largest players in the hospitality industry were like the Taj, the Hilton, the Oberoi. They had most of the market share, right? And the rest of the hotels that were in the industry were a vast majority of rooms that were operated by independent small operations with quality issues. Like for example, you and me would not go and stay in a 2-star hotel, right? We don't know what kind of
Exactly.
or a high, is it hygienic? We don't trust
Hygienic.
to go.
Are the sheets
Yeah,
clean? Are the bathrooms
exactly.
clean? Yeah,
Bathroom towels, all of that. Like as girls, we get that, right? The hygiene element.
exactly.
So small hotels that existed, and saw it as an opportunity, right? So what they did was they have a capacity building aggregator model. So they bring together all these hotels and they transform the quality.
So, Mekha, I was listening to your TED talk at AGBS Kochi, and you happen to have mentioned that those are the children we know, we see every day, on the streets, at shops. Like generally, as parents, our parents are concerned about what we eat, what we wear, where do we go to school, or how much we score in exams. But when it comes to them, there's a very little thing done by them or us in general. That reminds me of that song from Gully Boy that goes like, "Ab dekho to hum paas magar socho kitni duri hai." So, what is your
Mhm.
take on this?
Um, so I think one, I don't think that anybody is doing it on purpose. I think that just generally, I think sometimes I wonder whether seeing children on the streets has just become part of the visual, right? Like
Okay.
I sometimes wonder if I ask a child to draw a junction, right? A traffic junction. Sometimes I wonder the child will actually draw a child begging on the street because it's become
Exactly.
part of that visual that I think a lot of people have gotten used to. And I think it's just because people don't realize that they can do something about it, right? It's not clear to them what they can do. So I think it's just, I think there is a bit of awareness that needs to be provided to this problem. But okay, so let's take parents. And again, I am not a parent, so I'm not saying that I know how to take care of anybody's specific child, but let's just talk from a generic sense, right? So according to CRY, 40% of children are in need of care and protection, right, in our
Okay.
country. So basically, this 40% of the children that we're working with are just, they've not hit the what we call the genetic jackpot. The fact that they are just not born in my family or your family, they're born out on the streets, right?
Yeah.
But the challenge is that in the family based childcare model that all of us are a part of, people put a premium on competition and on hoarding resources, right? All our parents want their specific child to be special, right?
Exactly.
We have dreams and aspirations for our own child, which is fine. But the problem is more of the exclusivity of that, right? I exclusively want my offspring to do better than all other children, right? So
Exactly.
again, if we talk about examples of, let's say, an exam, right? An exam, and we talk about the IIT exams. Again, I'm just throwing out numbers here. I'm not an IITian at all, but let's assume that there are 1 million children who are applying for the IIT exam, right? And 1 in 1 million get like accepted into this university, right? And I'm feeling great, right? I'm feeling great that my child got it. But what happens to the rest of the 999,999
Exactly.
applicants out there, right? And that's talking IIT, right? You're talking about 40% of our country does not have access to these sort of opportunities and does not have access to any sort of resources, right? And they just stay in that level, right? And my children and your, I'm sure both of us, when we have our kids will also do better in school and college, and they'll
Exactly.
get a lot of opportunities that our vulnerable children don't get. But what parents fail to see, right? This is an interesting part. Again, I just think they just don't think about it. Is that no matter how well my child is, how well my child does well in life, how good he is and how successful he is still going to live in a society where 40% of his actual society lived in poverty, lived in abuse, and lived in neglect, right? 40% of the population is going to be like that, right? Which doesn't mean, so what happens is when a certain strata is put down, there is more crime, right?
Exactly.
Because they need resources themselves, right? There is more substance abuse, there is a lot of like what we call societal crimes will be more rampant. And if 40% of the society is like that, it is going to be so rampant for my children, right? They're not
Absolutely.
going to be safe. So the only
Exactly.
way that they are going to be safe is probably going to a developed country, going to, let's say, everybody. And that's something that all, I don't know about your parents. My parents kept saying, "Why don't you just move to America? Why don't you just move to
Everyone's parents aspire them to send
Australia?"
their children to abroad. Exactly.
Abroad, right? Right. But what does that say, or what is the hope for our country, right? What is the hope for our country to do better, right?
Exactly.
So unless you send your child abroad, it's going to be the reality for your child. So hoarding all these resources and not looking at the rest of the community does not make sense for our own community and for our own safety, right? So I think this is something that parents do need to think about, right? And my ask is not that, let's say, they have to give as much as importance as their own child. I'm not saying that at all, but know that you are responsible for the child out on the streets, the children in your community. You do have a part to play, right? There
Okay.
is this
Yeah.
there's this what phrase that goes, it takes a village to raise a child, right? So just imagine,
Exactly.
like, if you had a home, and one home had, let's say, 50 children, right? And around that home there are 200 to like 500 adults living around this home. And let's say that all of us took responsibility for the children in the home and made sure they had the right kind of food to eat, they have the right kind of infrastructure to live in, they have the right kind of education, right? If all of us together took responsibility for the 50 children, then definitely those kids are going to have better opportunity. So this is, especially when it comes to social causes, especially when it comes to our children, it is a community that's going to be the game changer for children in need, right? And again, this was a learning that I had. 'Cause when I was growing up, I thought that, oh, I had to be a teacher. That's the kind of volunteering you need to do. You need to teach a child for the child to get better. No, that's not it, right? All our skill sets, whatever skill set that we're able to bring to the table, actually does contribute to to a child. Like, for example, taking this example, for example, you contacted me for a podcast, right? What are you providing? A platform to talk about the cause, right? And now your
Exactly.
listeners know more about the cause. Next time they see a child on the street, they're going to have a different reaction. They're going to notice children's homes. They're going to talk about what we need to do with children's homes. You're providing a voice, you're advocating the cause, right? That itself is volunteering, that itself is impacting our kids, because our children do not have their own voices, right? During this
Exactly.
COVID time, children are the most vulnerable and most impacted demography, and nobody, they can't talk about their own problems, right? Unless we talk about it for them. So similarly, like, for example, for me, I love fundraising, right? And we talk about, also in Guardians, we talk about the ideological identity and a functional identity. Ideologically, we're all here for our kids, right? We're all here for kids who live in children's homes, and we want to make sure they get all the opportunities and they're looked after for, safe, nurtured, etc. Right? That is our ideology. Everybody in Guardians, from, let's say, the volunteers all the way up to the leadership team, this is what powers them on, right? But there is
Yeah.
a functional identity, right? Because what is my function with respect to that cause? There needs to be teachers, there needs to be caregivers, but they also need to be fundraisers, because without funding, none of our programs will happen. Without talking about about our cause, people in the community won't know about it, right? Without, let's say, technology, which, by the way, Guardian seriously does need help with technology. Without technology solutions, maybe certain solutions would not be possible, right? So there is a
Absolutely.
role for everybody to play, right? Everybody to play in this entire entire solution, right? So, and especially when it comes to fundraising, I truly believe that if we pump in more money into the sector, uh, there will be a better quality of resources. Like the shelter home authorities would be better quality. They can be trained. We can get more shelter authorities, because right now the numbers that we see is about every one shelter authority for 25 children. Can you imagine looking after 25 children all on your own? That just sounds like
No,
a nightmare to
absolutely
me. I
not.
can't imagine
Exactly.
doing one, right? There are not
Looking
enough
after one
shelter
is a nightmare
authorities,
these
right? There's
days.
not enough space. Exactly, right? And and there's not enough space for them. So can I get them a bigger place to live in, right? The money is what's missing, right? So I truly
Exactly.
believe, like, personally for me, if I can pump in more funding into the sector, it could be like a game changer. That's my personal belief. And at the same time, and this is again while growing up, actually people want to give. It's not like they don't want to give to charity, right? But because of all the bad
It's
PR
just
or some
that they
experiences
can't
that
give
they've had or heard
voluntarily.
of, they don't even know if they can trust the cause, right? They're always worried about, will this money be used for what they say it's going to be used, right?
Exactly.
So there's a divide. So I personally feel there's a divide between the two, let's say, strata of people, right? Where maybe maybe the lowest strata, they don't know how to ask for money, or they don't know how to report what's happening with the money. The upper strata is like, where do we give it? There's so much, right? And I believe that guardians, at least my role here, I'm right in the middle, where I'm saying, listen, this is a cause that we know, we're doing it, you can trust it, right? And we're bringing that money into the sector, right? So we do all sorts of fundraising, because again, the demand is there and the supply is there. It's just a matter of closing in that funnel. So that's where I personally also work at.
Okay, great. So you seem to have been emphasizing on this financial aspect, because everyone knows you may have a bunch of brilliant ideas, but if you don't have the money to implement it, it all goes in vain, right? So fundraising is a
Exactly,
integral part
yeah.
of it. Exactly. So and the problem in childcare system, improving childcare system is not easy, because they're like so much. It's like more than one third of the population are children, and they are all deprived and vulnerable.
Yeah,
So how do you
yeah.
make this possible? Like, what are the ways you think you can do it?
About fundraising in particular.
Yeah, fundraising and improving, given that the number is so big.
um Geeta, just pause
Yeah,
can you
yeah,
pause?
sure.
I thought
Yeah,
yeah.
that's great. We of course know that fundraising is important, right? So apart from shelter renovation, what are the other programs that are run by your organization?
So to ensure that children in need of care and protection receive the required care, resources, and support to grow into positive adults, Guardians is executing a two-pronged approach. So number one, we want to strengthen the capacity and capability of childcare institutions, right? Childcare institutions meaning children's homes, and we want them to be able to deliver high quality, family-like care, right? That's the first prong. The second prong is ensuring the smooth transition of care leavers or young adults into society. So at the age of 18, a child is considered to be an adult by the state. So then they're asked to leave the system because they need to make
Exactly.
space for the younger ones, right? So at the age of 18, they leave care. So they're called care leavers. So we also want to make sure that we help with the transition of care leavers, because at the age of 18, when you lose all your support, that is quite challenging for anybody, right? That
Exactly.
suddenly the home that you knew, the people that you knew, the money, all of it is gone, right? So what we want to do is we want to try to help care leavers while they transition into society. So how we strengthen in capacity build for shelter homes is that we have two areas of intervention. The first is we do infrastructure upgrade by renovating institutions to create a safe, clean, nurturing, child-friendly environment. Like for example, let's say that there are about 70 children living in a home, and the home just has about 3 or 4 toilets and bathrooms, right? That's a
Exactly.
lot of kids per bathroom. So what we do here is we try to build more bathroom cubicles so that we can make sure that every bathroom may be just for 4 to 5 children. Only
Four,
four to
five.
five
Yeah.
children has to share. So we build capacity with from the existing infrastructure, right? The second that we do is that we try to transform the administrative and care practices provided by the home by providing financial support to the home and asking them to focus on aspects like nutrition, counseling, education, healthcare, staff quality, etc. So the first part is the hardware, and the second part is the software. How do we make
Software.
sure the care practices are better? So here we've started working with education already. After post COVID, we're hoping to get into the other elements of childcare too. But this is the two-pronged approach that we have for capacity building of shelter homes. And with respect to care leavers, right now we run a financial support program which recognizes and also mentors young achievers from children's homes.
Okay.
So we select them based on their 10th and 12th marks as of right now, and we select 50 children in each of the cities that we're working in, which is Bangalore, Cochin, and Chennai. And we give them a cash award of 25,000 rupees because they've done really well considering all their
Exactly.
circumstances. They've worked hard, done really well. And we look at this funding helping them through the transition process in the first year. Because primarily what we've seen is when talking to shelter authorities is that when a child has the money when they're leaving the home, they're more likely to continue their education. When they leave the home, when they don't have that funding, they choose to leave. They'll have to work, so they choose to not continue their education. Right?
Exactly.
After a year of studying, they are much more proactive in continuing their education because they've already built like systems. So they end up fundraising on their own and then they get the money to continue. Right. So this 25,000 is supposed to help them with that initial transition process. And at the same time, we're looking at mentoring them and guiding them. So we run workshops throughout the year. We have financial literacy, like what is a bank account, how to use an ATM card, etc. Things that we know, but they actually don't, right? So
Yeah.
how do you save money, things like that. Then we have workshops on career guidance. How do you make a resume? How do you do an interview? How do you need to be dressed, etc. Things that could probably help them with the transition. We have workshops regarding that. So these are the areas that we're currently working in.
That's great. It's like you're providing them with a, starter package to go into the real world, what it's like out there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's a nice way of
So,
putting it. Yeah.
yeah, it's a starter pack, Get ready. It's the real world. You're about to land in it. Yeah. So when you're running an organization like this, I'm sure there are too many problems or hindrance when you do that. So especially given during this unprecedented time of COVID-19 pandemic, there must have been various issues
Mhm.
like risk factors relating to health of the children and systematic barriers. So how are you currently dealing with them?
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, it's been hard. So last year when COVID hit, I think our country went into lockdown by March 24th or 25th. And
Exactly.
one of the things that we realized is that shelter homes or children's homes were not prepared for a lockdown at all, right? So if you look at children's homes, most of their funding, 60% of their funding is either in-kind donations where people just donate things and food, etc., and or walk-in donors. So people just walk in and give them money. There is no plan. It's actually mostly serendipity. But 60% of the donations are like that. So when a lockdown comes into play, your community stops helping, right? The community can't come in and help you. So they lost 60% of all the funding that they had. So what we saw on ground, so what Guardians has about 200 homes that they are connected to. So we were able to check in with most of our homes and see what the challenges were. And this was the financial challenges were the biggest problems for shelter homes last year, right? Because of the fact that the funding disappeared. So what we did then was to round up our volunteers in our community and say that, listen, this is the challenges that are going there. And we raised a 40 lakh funding that was able to help them in the next couple of months. We were able to fund about 53 homes. And yeah, that was really good because at that point they didn't have their challenges. And also a lot of our volunteers was also, despite COVID, they went on ground and delivered groceries, right? Because some homes didn't have groceries that lasted past the 1 week, right? And they didn't have liquid cash on them to buy more groceries. So we really needed to step in there, and I'm really glad that my team did. Of course, other programs that we plan to run, like for infra program, we had to go on ground. We couldn't do all of that, but thankfully, our care leaver program, where we do workshops, was able to go virtual. So that was
Okay.
okay. But another big challenge that we saw last year, and I'm sure it's going to continue this year, is that education moved online, right? And none of our homes, or most of our homes, don't have computer systems or laptops or any sort of hardware that they can manage to continue educating their children, right? So that was like a huge problem. And at that point in time, I think most of India, rural India included, really needed laptops, and it was a really expensive CSR
Exactly.
activity. And unfortunately, most of our homes weren't able to get the hardware for this. But that was last year. This year, it's all of that plus health scares, right? That's what's happened to everybody,
Okay,
right? It's the financial aid
exactly.
issue, there's the education issues, but now we are seeing that COVID has started entering even into the childcare system. Touch wood,
Childcare
it
system.
is not impacting children dangerously as of right now. The variant is okay. So hence our children's health is mostly okay. But we are seeing shelter authorities getting COVID. And when shelter authorities, so imagine we're seeing cases where all the authorities have COVID in a home, right? So imagine you have COVID and you have to be responsible for the care of 50 children, out of which 90% of them also have COVID, right?
Oh
I mean,
my
when
God.
I heard those stories, I was just like, this sounds like a complete nightmare. So immediately what we did was we started matching homes to volunteers, so volunteers would keep contact with the homes that we're working in. We have about 136 homes that we're currently working in, and we've classified them as red, orange, and green. Red meaning that they're
Okay.
COVID positive or have symptoms of COVID. Orange meaning they're in financial distress, and green meaning that they're okay, like financially they're okay and they don't seem to have any symptoms, right? So
Okay.
for the red homes, we have volunteers who are calling them every day and checking in on them. And orange is like we're making sure they're getting financial support. So the aid that we're providing is one, we're providing a home care kit because again, because of lack of funding and the lack of knowledge, they don't know how to take care of children. Like they don't have digital thermometers or oximeters, masks, sanitizers, as simple things as even like enough Dettol to keep sanitizing a home. So what we do is we
Okay.
formed a home care package which has all these items, and we are sending it to all the homes to make sure that they have the basics for isolation. The second bit is that we are again, lack of finances makes them not take the RT-PCR test, and because of this, they're not able to isolate on time, and hence the COVID starts spreading at the home. So here we're looking at cases where, if, like for example, the BBNP is not able to come in to provide free RT-PCR tests, we come in terms of testing, and we're also connecting them to pediatricians so that if there is
Okay.
some challenge in terms of their health, they'll have doctors to call. So we do telemedicine and we call them also. So that's testing and treatment. And the third area that we do is financial aid. Again, we're trying to mobilize funds to make sure that homes are going to be able to survive for the next couple of months, because if they don't, either they send back their children or they close shop, right? And we really don't want that. So we're trying to keep the doors open. So these are the three ways. So what's interesting is that COVID's given us the opportunity to work with more homes, and homes are more receptive of the kind of support that we're giving. So it gives us more of an understanding of on rounds. That's been really interesting. But at the same, and something else that I was actually talking to my team was about children outside the care and protection is not a topic that people generally think about. But because of COVID
Exactly.
and the recent messaging that's gone out that children are getting abandoned, suddenly people are talking about it. Everybody's asking what's happening to the children who've lost their parents, right? What is the system? And it is so lovely to see the number of people who are asking about it, the number of people who are reaching out saying, how can we help? Because now they are seeing the reality, right? They're seeing how much they need to help their own kids, and now they're wondering what happens to the other kids. So especially during times of disaster, I feel like people are so much more like capable of sharing, right? They really want to share and help
You
other
know,
people.
more empathetic,
Yeah,
more
yeah. So
empathetic
that's
to other, rather than
it's
not like I should just look after me, my family, make sure
thinking
we are all
about
okay
others.
and my kids are. Yeah.
Exactly, right? So they're thinking about others, and yeah, that's been like an unintended, I don't know, nice thing, I would say, that at least people are talking about it and wondering. And I'm hopeful, right? This is going to be a conversation that's going to be in the front for quite some time.
Okay, great. So you see, you have to manage so many things, you know, as a entrepreneur, you have to manage your personal life as well as your work life, you know. So how do you manage that? I mean, what does your typical day look like?
Sometimes I think that this question is funny because I don't think that I'm managing it very well on some days. Um, yeah, I mean, the good bad is that a lot of the times your days are not structured. Entrepreneurs actually is a very trades, but the master of none, right? We do everything. Like we joked at the CEO of our organization has to like plan the vision of the organization, but also make coffee for everybody, right? You've got to do all of all of these jobs, right? So we do all sorts of jobs, and I think also when you enjoy it, you let it take over your life, but then eventually the it sort of takes over in the wrong way because you don't have time for anything else. So it takes some time to learn. I think you have to start and end your day. Like ending your day is very important. Like tell yourself that you are going to give yourself some time, give your families time, etc. But I do think that one thing that makes my entrepreneurial journey easier is that I have a good support system. My co-founders are like, I joke saying that they're the marriage that I didn't want. Like we know everything about each other in each other's faces all the time, but thankfully I love them, so it's okay. But they are like, we really help each other a lot. And I'm also grateful that I married someone who also understands this sort of lifestyle. He's an entrepreneur himself, so he also
Oh, great.
understands that sometimes you got to follow your passion, but especially like when you're married, definitely like you need to have those conversations saying that this is the life that I choose, and get the other person's buy-in. I mean, don't marry him if they don't have the buy-in. This is what you want, right? Thankfully I found something that's good. But yeah, I think um the what my day looks like is, I do try to wake up early before all the mayhem starts, right? When life starts. And one thing that I think has really helped my journey, something that I've picked up the last year, is that I've started writing. So you just start
Okay.
your day like just because especially when you're a leader, there are so many challenges and so many problems, and you're thinking about where the organization is going, etc. You need to take time to just focus on your thoughts, right? Focus on you, right? And I find writing a very meditative practice. I don't do meditations. I've not been able
Okay.
to keep my thoughts calm, but what happens when you write, like physically write in a book, is that your thoughts have to be slow because you can't write as fast as you think, right? So
Exactly.
I picked up this thing called morning pages, where morning pages is just a meditative practice of just writing whatever that comes to your mind. 3 pages. You've taken A4 size sheet and you write 3 pages, 3 sides of whatever that's in your mind, right? Just let it like
Okay.
just go out on a piece of paper. And I've been doing this for more than a year, and it's been very transformative. It's helped me see for myself what I need to work on, and it's given me a lot of direction. So, I mean, if anybody is looking to start, I mean, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, I think writing is a very good example. I mean, a very good
Absolutely.
activity. So, yeah, and like, and I think for mentorship, I mean, for entrepreneurship, what really helps is also mentorship, right? Trying to find people who are older than you, who have already done what you've done, to like have a chat with, speak to them about the challenges that you're going through, because you learn a lot from their experience. So I know a lot of entrepreneurs who actively look at mentors helping them. That's been a real help in terms of entrepreneurship also.
Okay. So, volunteering,
Yeah.
volunteership, and uh, you have currently about, I guess, 150 volunteers working under you or something, or maybe more than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
most of them must be college or university students.
Yeah.
And yeah, so, how do you think volunteering could be beneficial, or, how it is advantageous uh,
Yeah.
for one during a
Yeah.
college life?
So I always love answering this question because I was a volunteer, and then this became my career eventually, right? So back in college, I started volunteering only because I wasn't very interested in what I was studying. But what it actually brought me was, so with volunteering, you get that like a startup sort of an experience. Like you are responsible for things that nobody till college, like your family never trusted you with like important things, or your teachers, they always treat you like children. But when you
Children.
have volunteers, you have other children depending on you to do things. Suddenly you learn responsibility, right? And you don't even think about whether I can or cannot do it. It just needs to be done. Like you just start doing everything when you volunteer, right? So for example, I was again, when I was volunteering, I was doing fundraising also. And I would have to go talk to managing directors of companies. I studied in Coimbatore. And I was like, who am I to speak to a managing director in a company? I have no idea. But I got that opportunity, you know, and I went and spoke to him. Like there was nobody else to speak to him. So I went and did it. And suddenly I'm speaking to an MD and I'm what, like 20 years old, right? And he's sitting and asking me why I'm even doing this. I say that I believe in my kids and I want to really help. And I did get money from him, right? Because he's happy with the passion that we're bringing in, right?
Okay.
Similarly, you learn about Excel sheets, you learn about how to speak to people, etc., right? You suddenly are doing things that you've never done before. And then what happened to me was that I got my first corporate job, and the next thing you know, I was in my first week and somebody asked like questions and I would raise my hand and I would answer. I suddenly realized that all my peers, they were really scared to talk, right? They've
Yeah.
never been in a corporate atmosphere, right? Versus me, I had all this like these weird experiences of going and speaking to corporates that I
Interactions
could
with
take that.
MD from such a young age and everything.
Exactly, right? So I'm not saying I was important, I'm not saying that I was great at it, but I'm just saying that I wasn't scared by it anymore, right? I knew how to use PowerPoint, I knew how to use Excel, and just knowing those things gave me an advantage in my because when you walk into a corporate, uh, if a manager sees that you know things that he doesn't have to teach you, you are noticed, you're given that edge, right? He'll start working with you directly. So just generally you learn to adult or you learn to be professional much faster than when you finally get into a corporate, right? So that's on that end. But at the same time, when you're young and you're volunteering is when you can experience things, right? And social causes are something that everybody should experience, right? I think that there are many social causes. Like my mom, she loved dogs, like everything had to do with dogs in life. I don't know why, but they will feel connected to more than anybody, like more than all the other causes, right? So you, if you have a passion like that, have an interest like that, you do, it always helps to experience it when you're younger, right? Because right now at this age, I might be in my 30s, I don't want to say yes or no to that, but I don't have the time to go and try out new things. I have responsibility, bills to pay, and like family to go see, and etc. Like I have responsibilities. When you're younger, is when you can actually do these things and experience as much as you can, right? So volunteering gives you ownership. Volunteering gives you responsibility, and volunteering really helps you explore your own creativity. So I would highly recommend it. I know it definitely helped me, and because I volunteered, I learned that about myself so much that I jumped into it, 100%. Right, I made it my career. So yeah, to all the listeners, volunteer. In fact, we have volunteers from your college. Big fans of the volunteers of your college. Big fans, yeah, of your students.
Okay, great. To all of you listening out there, go for it. Don't think of it as too much work. Just go for it. Also, I'm sure there are many young ladies listening to us right now who are thinking about, taking risks, choosing paths that deviate from the banal career options. So, um, what will be your message for you, for them, by you? Like, do you believe there's this sort of pattern or formula, success mantra that you'd like to share with them?
Oh. Well, I don't think there is a formula. There is no one size fits all for sure. But I think one of the things that I really connect to, and this is something that I read in a book by Mark Manson. Um, it's The Subtle Art of Not Giving
Of
an
not
F,
giving a,
right?
yeah.
That's what the book is called. Yeah, yeah. So there
Yeah,
are
I have it
children in
right
this
there on my
podcast, so I
shelf.
don't want to use that word. Oh yeah, it's right there. Yeah. So there's this example where he says about how he uses an analogy of a rock star, and he says that everybody wants to be a rock star and they want to be famous, but to be a rock star there is a process, right? Like there is, I don't know, I'm assuming rock stars need to practice a lot. They need to devote their lives to music. They need to probably not have as much as money as everybody else. There's this entire process that is involved to be this rock star, which involves a lot of sacrifice. Now the problem is that if you don't enjoy the journey, you will never be able to get to the victory. The victory is only
Exactly.
at the end. For every victory there is a struggle. If you want the reward, but not the struggle, it's not going to happen, right? You have to want the result and the process, right? No, you can't say that
Exactly.
I'm in love with the victory, but I'm not in love with the fight, right? So whatever you choose in life, right? Maybe you want to be a huge, I don't know, business owner, or you want to be a huge journalist, and all these dreams that we have. We need to also think about the work that goes into it, and really think about whether that work is something that you will actually enjoy. Because to be honest, the victory is only at the end. The main part of your life is to get there, right? So
Absolutely.
happiness is not at the end, right? Happiness is along the way, right? That's going to make the end worth it. So I think definitely when you're trying out something, and like some people say, like a banal career, for example, what you said, it might be banal for me and you, but not necessarily for somebody else, right? So as a woman, and I think this is where we struggle, is even figuring out what the victory is, or figuring out what career we want to take up, right? um Speaking from experience, I feel like I was waiting for permission to put me first, right? I think as women, we are taught to be giving, we are taught to listen, we are taught to worry about our society and our safety and all of that, right? It's not one of being empowered, right?
It's
And I
always
think
about
I
seeking
spent a
that
lot of
opinion, that one validation, that one permission.
one
It's like
validation.
we are obligated to get that permission when we are not actually. It's just
Yeah,
the
we
way
are.
the society has
Exactly.
tricked us into believing.
Exactly. And that's something that took me a very long time to actually believe. I think I knew it, but I wouldn't believe it, or I wasn't brave enough to do it because I thought I couldn't. So I would like to tell young girls that don't give up on dreams and ambitions. And if you don't have one, that's okay also, right? But I even tell my friends, if you want to be a housewife, go for it. Like, nobody's saying that it's bad, but choose to be a housewife.
Exactly.
Don't do it because somebody is telling you to do it. Think about whether you want it. Once you think about whether you want it and then you choose to be it, good, then you're going to be happy. The problem is that when you don't put thought, when you don't think that you have a right, and you just follow somebody else's script that's written for you, you're never going to be able to be happy in your life, right? So this is something that
Exactly.
I would go back and tell my younger self, that there is no right and wrong, there is no right way or wrong way, there is just the way that you want, and you don't need the permission to want what you want. Just dream and go for it, right? And I think that's something that I would tell girls. One more thing that I would definitely tell girls, I think that we all really struggle with it, is that we need to learn to be kind to ourselves, right? Just say it's okay. Like, when if we make a mistake, I mean, we're too scared to move because we're scared to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes.
Exactly.
I mean, I still get plagued by it even today. I think it's something that we worry about more, because I don't know, sometimes I feel like men have this confidence that I don't know from where they get, where they get it from, but they talk with that confidence. Women, like, we're waiting for the permission or the validation to even speak to that level of confidence. It's not required, right? So be
Exactly.
kind to yourself, be patient with yourself. And I do also think for young girls, one good thing that would really help is if you can find other older women who can mentor you, or can be a call away for some help, because I think that helped me when I had like challenges of, because at one point in time, the only thing in your world is your family, and right and wrong is defined by family. But sometimes it's good to have another perspective, right? Of somebody who's done something that you like. So if you can find out, and I know a lot of women would love helping younger girls out, reach out to them and say, hey, listen, I'm so and so person, I'm struggling with this. Try to find people that you're connected to. It could even be
Exactly.
like older friend, right? It doesn't have to be like accomplished women or leaders. I'm not talking about that. Just talking about girls who are happy, who've done what they wanted to do, and just speak to them and take your problems to them, because they'll give you a lot of good advice. And I think advice that probably you couldn't get from your parents, you would get from other women. So I think women empowering women is a big component right now in our society.
I'm I can just imagine the women being around you feeling so lucky to have you who can go, just go and talk to you. That's absolutely blissful. I'm just thinking what it might be. So it was an
Oh,
absolute lovely session with you, Megha, and it was a
thank you.
delight having you here today. And it was hell lot inspiring. To be honest, it was very inspiring.
Oh,
So thank you for
thank
joining us today and watching. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you're listening to podcast, keep waiting for the next episode. Thank you.